and that's not.
All right, we are good to go.
We're good to go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Baskin. This is Introducing Intelligence into Your Malware Analysis. So, first of all, basically, why should you listen to me? Because no one ever does. Yeah, my wife doesn't. I'm a senior consultant at a small company called the Newberry Group. I work day in, day out as an intrusion examiner, reverse engineer, malware analyst, intrusion forensic analyst, and computer forensic examiner at the Defense Computer Forensics Laboratory. Those are all acronyms I spelled out for you. So, trust me. It's also called DC3, DoD Cybercrime Center, DCFL, lots more acronyms I could put in there. Unofficially, I have a Twitter account, BBaskin, and I run a blog called Ghetto Forensics, which is all about really cheap ghetto ways of doing forensic work, usually with Python code. So over the years, I've written a lot of books, mostly because I get bored and angsty every now and then. Most recent one being Dissecting the Hack with Jason Street. Did a technical section on that. Awesome book. If you haven't gotten it yet, please do so. And what really started this talk was some work I did back in 2006, which was combating spyware in the enterprise. And back then, this was a good 7 years ago. I feel old now. We didn't have that word malware. You know, we had this old vernacular of terms where everything was still viruses and worms and spyware. So that's how we had to word things back then. We had a recent coworker go take some very expensive malware reverse engineering class from a well-known institute. And when he came back, we started looking at the material and was like, this seems really wrong. This seems like a really old way of doing things. We've done a more intelligence-based approach to malware analysis for a few years now, and it seems like most people don't either are unaware of it or don't want to use that approach to it. So what I found was a lot of comparisons were made to material I'd looked at 7 years ago, and things seem to be the same over time. There hasn't been a lot of movement, hasn't been a lot of new innovations in how we do things. That's what I want to try to fix. So typically when we look at malware analysis and reverse engineering, RE being a little bit more in depth of all these little areas of malware analysis, we have our 4 major sections we look at. This is what we typically hire for, this is what we typically train for, and we focus people onto these individual sections, which is stack analysis, dynamic analysis, network analysis, and memory analysis now in the last 5 years. And this is just to run through some of these things, but when we look at someone doing stack analysis, we're telling, okay, look at streams, see what pops out at you. Look through all the API calls. Run YARA rules on these samples and see what pops up. To a little bit more advanced, we're actually looking at individual bytecodes. If you're seeing like a push here and something here and a comp and a test in these particular patterns, then that may be this sample. That may be this malware. To actually a little bit more go in actual scripting and pulling stuff out with IDA Pro. And then when we get another person who wants to do really good at dynamic analysis, so okay, we'll run a sandbox. Use tools like FireEye or anything like that to actually run the software or run the malware and see what pops up. Or do your manual analysis with just tools like Procmon, Redshot, which I actually don't like that tool at all, but I mention it because everyone else uses it. Or something I wrote called Norvin, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Grab files out, see what they come up with, run virus total on them, and that's what most of our typical malware analysts do on a day-to-day basis. It's just do those simple procedures. To the more advanced level where they're actually debugging it, they're changing the code flow, they're changing the Z flags and making it do what they want to do as far as reversing, unpacking, compressed malware, packed malware, and so forth. Network analysis has actually been around for a lot longer than any one of them, all the other ones. It's just looking at IDS filters and looking at IDS rules and building new rules based on the network traffic that malware is creating. Since most of them now are actually using HTTP GET or HTTP POST commands, it's actually pretty easy. You just look for those really unique things inside the GET request, which typically goes hand in hand with reversing to know which ones you should be looking at and how they're encoded. And then memory analysis, we're actually looking, okay, what's in memory after the malware runs, which could be either commands sent from a C2, which could be encrypted data that's now decrypted because it's in memory and malware's already loaded up. Typically things we look for, and touch a little bit more on that a little bit later on. I don't like this approach though. So we typically take people and say, okay, you're going to be my stack analysis guy, or you're going to get really good on dynamic analysis this month, or you're going to be a network guy. And we focus them on these skills instead of actual, what do we need to get out of the sample to do our job. And this works great If you're in a very large environment where you're working with 10, 20 people in your security team, we currently have just a dozen people that we bounce stuff day in and day out. We're all reversers. We do this day in, day out. It works great for us. For most businesses, though, they have one, maybe two people actually doing malware analysis or reverse engineering. You can't expect that one person to full deep dive in each one of these skills. They have to focus on what they need to do their job. So in that approach, I think this is a little outdated way of doing it because these are so complicated now. The level of compression, level of encryption and custom encryption that we see on malware nowadays is a little bit too much for one person to do alone. And it allows you too easily to go down rabbit holes you don't need to go down. Every sample that comes in does not need a deep dive reverse engineering. You don't need to spend 20 hours on this one guy to figure out exactly what it's doing. If you can do it in 1 hour, get 80% of what it's doing out, and pass it on, move to the next. Think about what's actually important to your company and to your defense. And you see that well in the actual job postings that we put out there for analysts and reverse engineers, where this is actually a typical one where someone says, I want 5 years of experience in my candidate with C++, Java, and .NET, and I want you to know x86 and ARM binary assembly processing. Most people don't actually use ARM in their day-to-day malware, plus its mobile devices. I want you to know each and every TCP/IP protocol that malware may use, exactly how it works. I want you to know all the SYN flags and NAC flags, and every TCP flag out there. I want you to be an expert in rewriting reports, and you should be really good at Ollie Debug and IDA Pro. How many people exist that fit this role? Very, 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 very few. I know, because we can't hire them. We're trying to hire this guy every day. We can't find him. So, in actuality, what should we be looking for is someone who says, okay, I need someone that I give you encrypted data, you can give me the decrypted version of it. If I give you some encrypted data right now, our sample has encrypted data, how would you go about decrypting that? Explain to me. Because I can think of 4 ways off the top of my head to do that for an individual sample. And you want to gear towards that type of thinking. I want you to tell me how you would document all the little minutiae that this sample might do. If it creates 4 individual Windows services and drops 25 files and move things around in a certain system, how would you document that correctly and get it all accurately? And the problem I found with this is tools like Redshot don't, because they grab before, they grab an after, but if things change in between, they miss it completely. So there's a lot of minutia that we lose when we start using some of these old tools. And if I give you some encrypted data, encrypted network traffic, how would you go about decrypting? How would you go about determining what data is static, which data is dynamic, and which data is encoded versus plain text? Because it might look plain text, but it's actually encoded in some way, shape, or form. How would you do that? This is what we actually need. When we put defenses up in a company, this is the data we need to do our job quickly, get through the malware sample, and move on to the 20 million others waiting for us. So, one of the biggest things the last few years has been the cyber kill chain, which is an old idea that's been around for at least 10 years. When I worked at a large corporation CSC, we had a version of cyber kill chain. We had 4 layers to it. Most companies had it as well. The last few years, the biggest push has been by Lockheed Martin to take what everyone knew and kind of package it up into a nice, glowing package that's easy to digest. So a lot of people have been hooking onto that system. It works well. It's basically the industry standard now for applying defenses and associating attacks to individual segments of your environment to figure out how to stop it and how to defend against it. And what we found over the last few years that we've been using the cyber kill chain in our malware analysis is it helps us to provide a little bit more granular control on the actual indicators that we need to get to our customers for them to do something about it, and keeping us out of the weeds, keeping us from going hours and hours and days in the stuff that no one really cares about. It's very easy for us to do because we like the mental challenge. It doesn't really help anyone. And trademark. That's now undergoing trademark by Lockheed Martin, FYI. So if you're not familiar with it, basically what we're looking for is these 7 layers of the kill chain, which is reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command control C2, and what actions take place on the other end. And we can use these to identify individual indicators at each layer that the malware may use for our overall installation, exfiltration, and so forth. And we break these down even more in depth. Reconnaissance is basically, we know that word, it's what did the adversary use to gather intelligence on its victim, which is your company, which is probably you. A lot of this you don't see. A lot of this is actually impossible to see until maybe after you close up the entire examination and you go back and look at your old web logs and say, oh, wow, this IP address we know is bad was actually gathering these files 2 weeks before the attack came in. But other ways we can see that is in individual themes of attacks coming in. If they're using spear phishing emails, then how are they directing that spear phish email to a particular person or maybe a particular group with a particular subject line, a particular type of attachment? They are trying to gear their malware in such a way to make you click on it. So how do they do that? What words do they use to actually make that work? And that could be something very simple, generic, like, hey, your webmail is over your quota. Click here to request more. To, hey, we see you're going to a conference. Here's the updated agenda for that conference. Click here to view or change your registration status. To the weaponization, which is where we actually get into the fun stuff of what technical means they use to say, take a PDF and put a malicious payload in it and encode it so that when you double click it, it runs that payload. And a lot of that is very particular to individual adversaries or individual groups. They have unique ways of doing things because they actually automate that. They have a tool to just say, take this executable, use this vulnerability exploit, put it into this PDF file, and make it run. So we can actually look for those types of things. To the transfer method, which is actually how you get it to your victim. Exploitation is actually how do you get that payload now to drop and run on your victim's computer. How does it install itself? Installation, which is installation, entrenchment, persistence. Install itself, make sure it stays constantly running. Sometimes you don't want that. You just want to run once and be done. That's a method of that. To command and control, was actually beaconing out to your C2 server in an either encoded or encrypted fashion, or even plain text for the really dumb malware authors. And then actions, which is hopefully what we don't get to, is actual control of your machines by the adversary to either exfiltrate data or do lateral movement or really bad stuff, because that's when instant response comes into play, and we really don't want that to occur. We want to stop it before it gets to an IR stage. So a little bit more concrete is when we look at these, Reconnaissance is looking at themes. Weaponization, we're looking at the actual type of attack that's going to be put into that decoy document. If it's a PDF, there's certain known PDF attacks. If it's a doc file, certain known is one of those. RTS and so forth. Flash. Delivery is mostly email. That's the vast majority of the ones we see. But you also have the basic watering hole attacks we see now, where if an adversary knows that you're in a particular area of West Virginia and there's nothing else around there to go and do, except maybe one bar and one shopping mall, hack that site of that local store, knowing that all the employees are going to go to that site over time. They don't have to attack your company, they can attack where you're going to go to. To your peer-to-peer USB devices, same old stuff. Exploitation, looking at actual CDE number to see what exploitation they can run inside their document to pop your box. And then we're pulling up installation artifacts, basic stuff. And then the actions, where we get really fun, is looking for them to create archives of data to steal, looking for them to do running applications across your network, grabbing passwords, doing lateral movement. Again, that's when you get to that level, you're in it deep. That's where it gets really hard, and usually call an outsider in like me. So to go into these and what some of the things we look for and how to pull those out for your analysis. And this is going to be geared mostly based on free or open source utilities. Some of the paid utilities out there are great, but your return on investment for a single man shop doing security, it's not worth it. There's a lot of free tools that can get you the same benefit at the end. So when we're looking at Reconnaissance, we're looking at a decoy document. And this example here is for a conference, it's a regular PDF. If the adversary knows that your employees are going to a conference at this certain time of day, if they know that all your attendees go to, or all your employees go to DEF CON a certain time of year, or SmoothCon a certain time of year, or Black Hat DC at this time of year, then it's very easy for them to target your company. If they know your entire IT staff goes to Black Hat, great. A week beforehand, they know exactly what to put into that email, and they know who to send it to based on Twitter feeds. So it's the things we look for as the overall compass, the theme. One tool that we basically all use is ExifTool. That's a little hard to read, I apologize. Slides are available afterwards. ExifTool is a Perl-based, but it's also executable tool that just looks for all types of metadata in whatever file you give it. It was designed for camera pictures. It's still designed for camera pictures, but it just happens to work on anything. So you give it a Word document, it says, oh, here's every field in the metadata in that Word document. And if you give it PDFs, here's everything inside that PDF. It's very well written to cover almost every file type. And so from this data, we see the actual creator, we see authors, we see a lot of stuff that's actually really hard for you to read. No worries. But some of the things we look for here is, for example, there's a title and there's an author given to this document. And the title being President Clinton Event Request Form. This is a very old document, but it's a good public one. Author being an Arlene Goldberg. So where did this adversary go on the internet to download this file, and why do they think to link it to you somehow? These are kind of things you give to your big brain thinkers somewhere in another department and let them figure out. But those things we kind of clue on is this is a very particular event, this is a very particular person, which will lead to a source somewhere on the internet that they visit at some point in time to download this. It may even be your website. It's basically what you're looking for. If this is a PDF that came from your website with certain things that you know belonged in there, then you can go back through your access logs and say, when did a particular person download this document? Somewhere near when this attack was launched. And we get to the weaponization form of that. We take that same PDF, and we're looking for really cool data out of it. So this is basically a hex dump of a RTF document, rich text format, which you can tell by the very first bytes up there. And these are the three things I look for when I'm looking through a file of this type. And that's basically, the first section is the exploit being used. If you've done rich text format files before, there's a very well-known and old-school attack, 2010-3333, which is also called the p-fragments attack. And so basically, we look for the word p-fragments within the first 48 bytes of that file, like here. And that's pretty obvious. That's going to be a p-fragments attack. Based on that, any data below that is going to be hex-encoded shellcode. So that's the second section up there. It's actual shellcode stored in hex. It's the actual attack component. That's what tells your Adobe to drop a file, read data out of that file, drop it here, and do something with it. And then the third segment is the actual payload that's encrypted or encoded into the actual PDF document itself. And what this is they're all going to be encoded. Maybe 1% is actually plain text. Most of them, you follow a very basic design of a 256-byte XOR key. And you can kind of see that by looking for these null segments where it counts down 0, 3, 2, 1, 0, FF, FD, FD, FC. It's a 256 decrementing XOR key. So it goes from FF down to 0, 0, and then starts back again FF down to 0, 0. They have that incrementing, they have it decrementing, they have different variations of that shift left, shift right, somewhere in the middle. But you're looking for that routine, and then you're looking for what was the first byte used in that chain. Might be incrementing 256 and they start at BB, or they start at EC. That's something actually is particular to many adversaries, is what byte they start at and what encryption routine they use. So based on this, we see the exploit being used, which is pretty generic. We have shellcode, which is actually pretty indicative of someone, because that's something that's actually written by a tool, written by an author. And sometimes we're looking for little minutia things in here. Like right after that shellcode, we see 4 X's and 4 Y's. And the only thing that really stands out to me is that when you're looking at the shellcode level, 4-byte strings really should pop out to you, because that's the small, or actually the largest set of string size you can put in the memory for that level. And that shellcode is basically saying, open this file up from beginning to end. Start going through until you see XXXX. Once you find XXXX, now look for YYYY. Once you find those, start dumping data, because that's your payload. So somewhere in that shellcode is saying, look for these bytes. And you can usually pick those up pretty easily when you're just looking through it by eye. Most of the time this happens behind the scenes. This just happens automatically when you're on the malware inside a reviewer. But when you start training yourself to look for it, it usually pops out really quickly to you once you start looking for it. And then you can start carving it out, putting it somewhere in your reports, and then waiting for the next attack to come in. And say, hey, this used the same shellcode, different payload, same shellcode, and same 4-byte markers inside the document. It's like, hey, that's a clue. You know, that's probably the same adversary looking to get the same data or coming from the same domain name. It's a pattern that we look for that we can now build into our defensive products. And the same idea for weaponization is pulling out metadata with ExifTool. In this example, we use the creator tool, which is created by Word 8 with a Chinese character, Acrobat PDF Maker 8.1. And you think, hey, you're a little small company from Indianapolis. You don't have Chinese tools in your environment. I hope not, unless you went to Pirate Bay. But, you know, rink's high, so I don't judge. So these things pop out to you and say, hey, everything else looks in this document looks good, except for that. We don't use that software to create this. And in the last 5 attacks we've gotten of the same file format, they've all used that same creating software to actually make this document. Again, another pattern that pops out to you. And those are what we call loose clues. Other tools we can use to gather this stuff. ExifTool Office Mouse Scanner is a free tool that you can throw your Word documents into, and it'll automatically say, hey, this is a Word document that has this attack in it. I see that, I know it, and look, this is shellcode. I'm going to go ahead and pull that shellcode out for you. And it'll, hey, this might be a payload. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out for you as well. It doesn't know what to do with it, but it can at least detect it and pull it out automatically for you to do something with. Same people wrote that RTF scan, which does the same thing for rich text format files. Cerebro and PE Explorer do very similar for executable files, that you actually go into the internals of a PE file, an executable file, and look at them. Revello Mozilla PDF Stream Dumper is what we use for dealing with JavaScript, PDF files, and so forth. Mozilla is great, actually, if you want to massage the JavaScript to do certain things, to actually get it to work and exploit. It's a great tool for that. All free. And then Malware Tracker PDF Scanner website, which is malwaretracker.com. It's a great site as well because it documents, over the last 6 months, 80% of the attacks have been using this exploit. And they're using this file format with this exploit and this type of data. So you kind of document ahead of time what you should be looking for to protect in your environment. They keep track of all the attacks. So now they have a payload, they have a PDF, they have an attack that they want to now give to your victim who works inside your company. That's a delivery method. 99% of a stat I just made up is going to be email-based. So they're going to have an email sent to a specific person from a specific person with an attachment, and expecting that person to open it up. And these are also additional clues we can pull out. Who was it sent from? Was it a name that you see before in prior attacks? Was it sent from a domain name you see before in prior attacks? Which kind of loses its efficacy if it's always Hotmail or always Gmail. But sometimes they use very usable or very notable patterns to their usernames. And who do they send it to? Do you have a particular person in your company who's always the victim of these attacks? You always have that one guy, trust me. It might be time to fire that guy, but keep his email account active and just reroute it to your IT team. That's probably the best thing to do. So looking for that style of email attack, you grab the data out of that, to watering hole attacks, which is basically the website that everyone goes to, your local cafe that has daily specials, your local vacation places around your corporation. And that's usually just a form of an iframe just written into the bottom of a known HTML document that's already on the website. In this case, deploy java.getJRES. Do you have Java installed? If so, iframe, source, equal, boom, that's a bad thing. So, in most cases, companies don't think to look for this. They doesn't even cross their mind. They're looking for the email attack. They're looking for the USB attack. They don't think to look, oh, we went to Joe's Crab Shack website, whatever, on site. We know that's a known good domain, so we're just going to ignore that. Now, once they actually have that document in-house, what are they using to drop the payload and actually run it against your machine? This is something we actually do. Most people actually already look for. Is what CVE number was used. And if you throw that file up in VirusTotal, you throw it into your A/B scanners, it's going to tell you that. So most people are actually already gathering this information out. They're just not doing much with it. They're saying, hey, it's bad. Bad or not bad. That's most of the extent that people will use it for. What we're telling you is keep it in mind and see if you can track the same CV number over time in correlation to the other indicators you've already gotten. If you have PDF attacks, they're using the same CV number, coming from the same domain name, or hitting the same target, these are, again, bigger indications of patterns. And if you start picking those things out early on, you can stop the attack, again, before it occurs, before you get to that incident response group. Obviously, though, if you have a CV, it probably shouldn't get much farther anyhow. But on the back end, if you know you can use this to farm other indicators from higher up in the chain that may have passed your site earlier, so that you, again, block it before you get to this level on your network. And these are going to be focusing your individual tools. If you have an old version of Adobe Acrobat 9.0, which is called left, right, Sunday, stop using it, for one thing. They're targeting these old day attacks, unless they have 0 days, which is a term I hate because people use that very badly. We've seen that last summer with the Elderwood attacks. It's like, oh, they have a whole unlimited amount of 0 days. No, they had like 5. But it sounded cool in the press. Like, oh, unlimited amounts. They just keep pulling out of their pockets of new 0 days to drop. Actually, no. Once you've got those first few, you got all of them. And you can just stop them all. But again, they focus individual applications on your network. And if you have the same application getting targeted every single time, maybe you should stop using it. For one, just stop using Adobe products. Let's just start with there. That's probably the easiest way. And Microsoft will, that's a close second. But that's a harder fight to battle. So how do we get this data out? The most popular way is actually submitting it to VirusTotal and getting those results out. Everyone loves VirusTotal. Everyone submits their stuff to it. Everyone looks at it to see what's on there, including adversaries. That's the only downside, is that they know the MD5 hash of the file. You submit it to their website, VirusTotal, they're tracking that. So they know when you upload it. So they can then gauge how fast you are in responding to incidents and which ones you actually respond to. If they send you 5 attacks and you only send 2 files of the VirusTotal, they know which ones got by you and which ones you actually caught. And it took you 8 hours to actually catch those and upload it for scanning, or 30 minutes. And they can use that then on the next attack. So there's ways around that. I might release a tool later on this year to cover that. But for the most part, just something to keep in mind when you're uploading stuff. Very similar sites like Jotty do the same thing. And when you look at the actual URL, if an email has a hyperlink text in it, an actual URL that you wasn't clicked on, wasn't anything done with, you can send it to a site like URL Query or Joe's URL Analyzer to actually say, go to this website, see what happens. And for that, I love Joe's, urlanalyzer.net, because it has great red flags to say, went to this website, saw bad JavaScript, dropped PE file wrote to the temp directory wrote to system32. It's like flagging all these cool stuff. So at the very high level is like, oh yeah, that's bad. That's pretty bad. But the biggest thing we use and what we push is YAR rules or sign search rules. Sign search is just another tool like YAR. Very different structure. I love it. A guy named Luigi, can't pronounce his real name, that's what he goes by, because he has thousands of pre-programmed rules for you already in place to help pick out some really obscure compression or encryption routines. And then we go to the part that I think most people are familiar with, is the installation. Is once you actually run that malware, how do we document each and everything it does to that system? For this, most people use sandboxes, they use FireEye, they use Cuckoo, They use whatever is available out there. I love Cocoa. It's free. It's open source. I have some issues with it, mostly on, again, some people mentioned to me earlier today or yesterday, is getting data out of it. If you just want a simple plain text report that you can copy paste into a report, it's kind of hard to do. And additionally, it gives a lot of background extra noise that you just have to train yourself to overlook. You usually get really large reports out of it. So one thing I wrote is a tool called Norvin, which I released earlier this year, which kind of does the same thing for you, but is a little bit more streamlined and focuses on just the really cool stuff. And I apologize, it's a little bit hard to read up here. I think my resolution, usually my Mac actually really scrunches down for projectors. These are the projectors actually doing native resolution, which is bad for you guys. But what this tells you is that create file, WinWord32, actually ran or dropped a file called recycler server.exe. WinWord32 then created a process of server.exe. Server.exe created a file of temp vmm3.temp, which no longer exists, it was deleted. Server.exe then renamed that file to Windows directory system32 dhpserver.dll. Server.exe then created a new process of Notepad to run twump32 executable. Why? Don't know, but probably for another process of injection. It created registry values for DHP service to change the service DLL to that brand new service.dll file. And then it actually ran that DLL. Deleted some file that didn't exist, ran some new process, and so forth. So when you remove all the extra cruft from your analysis, it's basically what we care about. Is I ran this tool, I ran WinWord, I ran Adobe Acrobat Reader, it opened up my file, and then here's all the stuff that happened afterwards. And a lot of this is mostly possible if you scan the entire system and you start removing things you really don't care about. And what you're left with is a really strong set of basically unknown knowns that we don't know about, but if we see them, they're bad. And that's what basically Norvin does. Norvin wraps around procmon. You drop Norvin, it's Python script, you drop procmon on the file, on the server, the two of them run together, you get a nice clean report at the end. So, just talk about this. It's my tool. I like to pitch it a little bit, and it's free and open source. It's a command line tool that we basically say, run it, get some reports, get some results, scan the system in real time to see what's going on, produce a report at the end. And why I use this instead of other sandbox environments is that we have a lot of samples where you have to coerce the malware in certain ways. It doesn't just run and do something. It requires a command line option. It requires you to interact with it in some way. It requires you to maybe debug it and change some data or feed it false data for it to actually execute and start beaconing out. Most sandboxes just give up on that. They do a native run. If it doesn't run, they give up. And then you have to give it to your analysis team, and they have to do it manually and work out how they actually get it to work. This way, I can actually just load the malware up in Ollie Debug, start Norvin, trace through it, change it if I need to, and actually get a good result at the end. And there's where you can download from. And here I want to switch over to see if this will work and not crash anything. And there we go, a little bit.
It's not capturing it.
It's not capturing, that's fine. I'll talk through it. So here's a report that basically this is what you look for. This is the actual report. And I'll zoom in. So I'm just spend a minute on this. But basically, this is the key things we'll look for. Is this runs procmon. It saw that explorer.exe ran a folder called hexde.exe. Here's the PID. And the cool thing I like to do is then search for that PID and say, okay, here's every other line that pertains to what that file did. And when you look at that, it ran command.exe. Services run, did some other fun stuff. It created a folder in your recycler. It created an L folder, it created a U folder, it created a file called @symbol, which had this MD5 value. It creates some more files in there. And for every file it drops, Norvin will upload the virus total and give you the result. Either a number or, hey, this is brand new. It's not been scanned before. So as it's dropping stuff, Norvin's actually scanning it. If you point a folder of YAR rules against it, it will compare each file that's dropped against your rule set. And what this comes up with is that one of these files with this MD5 tagged on 0 access. And when I uploaded the virus total, it got a hit of 42 out of 46. So automatically, before you even start analyzing this file, we know what it is. We have a very good handle on this. We know what files were dropped. We know what they are. We know what we can do with them. And down here is the registry section. We can see it deleting Windows Firewall. It's deleting all kinds of bad or good stuff that it should not be deleting. And then it starts beaconing out to all these IP addresses and so forth. Very bad stuff indeed. So in a quick, easy way, I just run the malware and I get a lot of very good results before I even start reversing it to say, here's what happened. Now, in-house, we don't use virus total because we're air-gapped, but commercial side, where I use it at, it works great. That's actually not the latest version. I'll start to do some pit testing. I'll push it up next week sometime. So we're using tools like that. We use CaptureBat. We use Cuckoo Sandbox. Or if you feel lucky, you can use some of the web-based systems out there, Anubis, Eureka, Malware. Be careful what you upload. On a No Hackers list this last week, someone noted that on Malware, someone uploaded a key, or basically a credential stealer output file. So someone uploaded a text file that contained all the credentials of a hacked network environment, which is then publicly available to everyone to view. Awesome stuff, which I surmise is actually a great exfiltration routine if you just want to get something out of your network. So the next thing we look for, and the idea also when we go back to installation, is that we want to key in on these files. We want to key in on these folder names. We want to key in on all these things because that same file will appear again in the future. So many malware drop a file called tempdw20.exe or tempupdate.exe. Those are a dime a dozen. But then we start looking at it, it's like, hey, actually, only about 5 of them actually do that. We just see the same 5 over and over and over again. So we start keying on these very unique names and very unique directories and very unique patterns of dropping files and writing registry keys. Again, we know what the malware is before we start actually reversing and analyzing it. And at that point, we look at the C2 traffic, which says, how is this beaconing back to another machine? We use tools so it doesn't beacon back. We handle it all in-house. Now, I apologize, this is a little pale on the bottom here. I'll explain it to you. But the top two are HTTP post requests or GET beacons. The first one's kind of well known, where it goes to a certain domain name and looks for a KYS allow GET with a name of getkys.jpg. So that's been known for a number of years. It's very easy to pull this data out. I mean, look, you have a host name, you have IP address. Like, wow, I mean, this is pretty obvious stuff as to what it's doing. Less obvious is the second one, which is used by the Elderwood attacks, which basically says, look for the Swift file, movie that Swift, send it a parameter, apple equals 8A9696, and so forth. So based on that, do something. And if you don't know, if you take that value after apple, it's hex encoded, so convert it to actual bytes, and then it's XOR encoded by the last byte, so E2. So when you XOR it by E2, you actually get another URL that says http://something.exe. So again, before it even gets to that point, you can automatically write a decoder for that to say, if you see this, decode it, drop it, and we know what that file is, we know what it's going to. We've seen that same URL in the last 4 attacks. And the bottom one here, very hard to read, but it's basically a 256-byte random binary packet. Does anyone know what that is? There's one very notable malware that just sends 256 bytes of random, seemingly random data. That's poison ivy. That's like the only way we know to pick up on poison ivy, is to look for 256 bytes of just random data. It's actually encrypted with Kademlia and other layers on top of it. Very, very strong encryption, very hard to work with. But since it's the only malware that sends 256 bytes of data, it's pretty easy to pick out a lineup on their behalf. So knowing this, we start writing rules, we start writing patterns. If you don't know where to start, if you search for DeepEnd research, they have a great doc file, spreadsheet online on Google Docs, of known malware from known adversaries and what the traffic looks like. So if you see this HTTP command, it's this APT group. If you see this, it's this Russian crimeware group. So they have all this out for you. It's a great big resource. Actually, thousands of entries on that, so definitely look that up. But you're using that, again, to build patterns for your own environment. You want to build your SNORT rules, you want to build your IDS rules, IPS rules, to look for these known URLs, or known structures in the URL. And you also want to take it the next step forward, which is, if you see that structure, you should also know that this field here is your host name that's being beaconed out. And this field is maybe the Windows OS version. And this field is, whatever the process ID of what's injected into. So you also want to start getting that data out, decoding it, and logging it as well. Because if you just see it beaconing out, it just tells you have a machine infected. If you see it beaconing out with an IP address and a host name and a process ID, it actually gives you some clues to actually detail on that machine and stop it. But you have to know to look for it, you have to know how to decode it. Which is kind of things what we do when we reverse, is that should be your top priority. Look at the network traffic, look to see what high-level indicators are being beaconed out, decode that, write a little Python script, and give it to your network guys. And just say, if you see this again, you need to get this data out of it. Here's a script, modify however you need to work in your software to get this stuff out. And for that, we do use a typical software, Wireshark FakeNet. FakeNet's great because it listens on all the ports and acts like a real server for every service out there. So if your malware starts beaconing to a web server, it pretends to be a web server. It gives it fake data back. If it looks for a certain file on a certain path, it's like, okay, sure, I'll pretend to have that file and send it something back. But the idea, too, is if you build up a nice assortment of known C2 servers or clients, in malware world, they're reverse terminology. So the C2 client is what the adversary uses on his end to control his thousands of servers. But if you have all the ones out there, you try to start collecting these, which is a great resource, you can see network traffic. It's like, I think this looks like this malware. I have a client for that. Let's put it on a fake machine, put it on the VM, see if it connects. If they connect and handshake and beacon, great. I know exactly what it is. I can stop and move on to the next thing. A lot easier with the commodity rats out there like Poison Ivy, Java Rat, Dark Comet, Bitfrost. Those are all commodity rats. You can just buy it. It's made by some guy in New Jersey. Doesn't matter. Those are a little bit easier to go after. The hard ones are the custom ones. And what you basically have to do is write your own custom client snapshake. So use Python, use Perl, use whatever. Reverse the networking protocol to know if it beacons with this, you need to find a way to decode it and figure it out. What we see with Ghost a lot. So Ghost is a commodity rat. It sends a known structure, which is the first 5 bytes is Ghost, with 0. What a lot of people do is just change those first 5 bytes. Now it doesn't work with the actual commodity client anymore. Same network structure, same everything, but it just doesn't work because the download client you buy looks for the word Ghost. So you have to make your own. To say, I know the structure, I'll just ignore those first 5 bytes and decode everything else. That's a little bit more the harder work on you, but it pays off in the end. You write it once. If you ever get something in the future that looks like it may be Ghost, just run it. It works. It handshakes. It decodes. Great. You know what it is. Move on to the next thing. That's what we want to try to get to. To the more important stuff like configuration numbers. See how I'm doing on time here. Great. I'm going to run through a little bit of stuff a little more quickly here. But configuration numbers is basically the malware has a known set of C2 data inside the executable, usually in an encrypted format. To say, when you run, load this data into memory and then work off of it, which is going to be the IP address it beaconed to, a campaign marker, all these little cool stuff that pop out. Most times this stuff is encrypted or encoded into the file, but you can actually write stuff that decode automatically. Malware has a good assortment out there of configuration numbers they've written to say, look inside the executable, look for this known byte pattern, and then pull the data out and decrypt it with AES encryption with this key. So before you even run the sample, you can run this on the file and say, hey, We know what this is. It drops a legitimate structure. We don't even have to run it now, because this is all we want, right? Do you need anything more than this? Do you need any more that we know what the malware is? We know what the network's going to look like based on previous examples. We know who's going to beacon to and what it's going to look like. So you can use that, throw it into your rules, and be done with it. Again, don't go down these rabbit holes if you don't need to. Find a smart way to get this data out, automate it, get it to your network defense guys, and start saying, if you see any traffic going to this IP address with this port, automatically block it. And you can get that in 2 seconds without even running the malware. And we also gather in memory. I won't touch too much on this for time's sake, but if you go to Ghetto Forensics, I have my most recent post on there. It's basically how to automatically pull this stuff out of memory, decrypt it, while the malware is running inside a VM. So the same basic data, it's encrypted. You don't know how it's encrypted. It could be AES, it could be triple DES, it could be custom. You don't know, but you don't need to know. All you need to know is it decrypts it in some way when it runs the malware. So once it's loaded into memory, just pull the decrypted data out. Skip the whole step of trying to figure out the encryption routine. And then the last step is basically the action side of it, is looking for lateral movement, looking for what they're doing once they get on your network, and how you can detect this, which is mostly looking for the actual C2 commands being sent from the adversary to your infected machines. If you know the structure, and you know this byte pattern here means list all directories, or list all hard drives, and then get file, put file, whatever. You want to start decoding that, which means you're going to need PCAPs. You're going to need something to work off of. The other ways we look for that is actually looking for the pwdump commands. I use star there, but it's like pwdump6, pwdump7, pwdumpx. There's so many pwdump commands out there to dump passwords. Keyloggers, exfiltration, looking for archives made with rar-hp, which says encrypt with a password and encrypt the file names too. And usually if you see that, that's not something your users typically use. That's an adversary, and so forth. And then the best way to get this, again, is using PCAPs. We'll ask you something that actually can decode those PCAPs. So out there already, MITRE has a tool called ShopShop. They introduced it last year at SWU. It's open public source right now. It's great for that, which basically you feed it a PCAP. It knows certain structures of malware beacons and can automatically tell you, at this time, the adversary issued this command. You got these results. You issued this command. You got these results, and so forth. And then you can write your own modules based on reversing to put in there. You do your research once, you write the plugin, and then for the next 6 months until they change the structure, you can automatically decrypt that and say, here's everything that adversary did on this date from these times. Just spit out a report. And that, for incident response, is great, because that's what you want to do before you call in the incident response group, who is very expensive and will charge you a lot of money. So you want to try to do that internally in-house and work towards that goal. So what do we gather, to close this up, is what are the things we should be looking for and how do we store them? We're looking for file names. We're looking for hashes. We're looking for MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256 fuzzy hashing and comparing fuzzy hashes to each other. Not only on the actual file, but if it's an executable file, you want to look at the individual sections themselves. So there's a data, R data, code, so forth, resource. Because in many samples, they have the same exact code, same exact R data, same exact strings, but the resource is different. Which means I'm going to use the same exploit, same everything, but I'm going to have a different embedded exploit, or a different embedded payload to actually drop. So overall, you have a different MD5, but when you look at it a little bit more in depth, you're like, it's the same file we've seen 100 times already, because there's the same 4 out of 5 sections are identical. It's just they use a different payload this time. So that's the depth you should be looking at to get out of these. Most online scanners actually do that section hashing for you. If you're not already doing it, definitely do it. Because when they say we have 18 million brand new malware samples a day, that's BS. It's usually just a handful, or a few hundred. They just change little bits in the sections to make it look like a whole new MD5 value. Network traffic, entrenchment, get all these file locations out, get the registry keys out, throw them into a database of some form. What database? Well, there's quite a few out there. A lot of people use RTIR. Try it, write for it, give up on it, move to something else. It seems to be the standard approach with that. There's other tools out there. DirectQ is a commercial product that does very similar work. that says, based on this email, here's all the intelligence you can gather from it. CrowdStrike does a lot of tools with this. Some more of your intelligent products out there. Most companies I know go eventually with the custom program route to say, for each layer of the cyber kill chain, here are your indicators that we see across these samples. So again, you kind of narrow your focus for a correlation of check installation across 20 different samples. Check exploitation across 20 different samples. If you get something new coming in, check against this entire database of old samples. And the great thing is you go out to VirusShare then, or go out to VirusTotal, and start downloading just millions of malware samples. Throw it into your database, and you have a bigger workload to compare against. Like, hey, we never got infected by this, but someone did. And we're going to use their results to build up our defenses. And then everything per instance. So all your emails that you send, any emails that got sent in to you. If you have a user that actually emails the adversary and says, hey, that attachment didn't work, can you send me another one? I've seen that in 4 cases so far. Yes, you want to log those things. When they respond back, say, oh, hey, look, here's a different exploit. Try this one. You want to grab both of those files. It does happen. Memory dumps, all this stuff. Grab it, throw in a file, keep it forever, correlate against it, because you will see these same attacks again. And that's the problem most companies have, is they look at an attack-by-attack synopsis of, we got attacked today, and we're going to get attacked again in 6 months. Again, that's all they see of it. They don't look in depth to say, in the last 3 years, we've been being attacked by one guy from the same domain name. In most cases, it usually is one guy. It might be Russian business network, but it's one guy who's continually attacking your network. So what do you do with it? Take those data, write sources, write signatures, write scripts, use Yara, Cybox, IOCs. Build up as many signatures as you can. And the idea is if you see DES has certain known structures. Put that in the Yara rule. If you see DES and you've had 5 different DES attacks with different passwords, put those passwords in there too. Anyone know what this means from? Anyone? I'm a hipster presenter then. Chinese food? Awesome. So Google that. You'll hate me for that. Every time you get an attack, write a Yara rule. And not just one, but as many as you can. What you want is to get dozens of rules for every attack. The idea being that in 2 weeks, when the next attack comes in, maybe 10 of those rules hit. 2 don't. Well, now you've got something to focus on. Why didn't those 2 rules hit? These 10 did, those didn't. What did they change over here? A week later, now you only have 4 rules hitting, and 8 don't. Oh, okay, now we got a major shift of TTPs here. Something's changing. We need to go back and reassess the malware. But if it's all 12 hitting over and over and over again, don't reverse it again, because you don't need to. You've got your rules. You're hitting great. Move on to the next thing. But when you start, that number gets less and less and less. Now you know I need to go back in and reverse this again to figure out what's changed since the last time. Sign search, let's get rid of that a little bit. Unique strings, PDB strings, these are things we're writing rules on. Encryption routines. Basically what it comes down to is the math. That's what they don't like to change. They will encrypt the strings. They will change things. They will put reverse order. But when they have good math in there, that stays the same. And we'll see the same string encryption routine used for 4 years. We'll see the same memory encoding used for years on end. Everything else changes except for that. So if you can find the good solid math in there that the apps put in there and write a rule on that, you're golden for a long time. And that's something you should be focusing on. So overall, what are we going to be doing with this? Collect all your artifacts, everything possible, emails, web logs, DNS logs, proxy logs. Put them all into a central database for correlation. Make one if you need to. Use RTIR, build one yourself, doesn't matter. They need to go somewhere. Gather everything you can from actually running the malware. Grab your ExifTools, grab using your results from Yara sign search rules. Get the strings out, which mostly we ignore for the most part, but a lot of shops really focus on that. Gather all your runtime artifacts, even just a text-based report from Norbin. Throw it into a database and say, we have a hit. We've seen this file name before. It's a really weird file name. It might be the same malware. And what you should be doing is, again, responding to it as quickly as they come in. This is geared to speed up your analysis. So you're not spending 2 weeks on an attack. We spend 2 hours doing this. A lot of times we get a sample in and be done with it in an hour, usually less. Because we've seen it before, we've dumped the memory, we've dumped the configuration, we know exactly what it is. We say, we know this, we got it, it's beginning to here, we've seen this structure before, we're done. Here's your rule you should write to stop it, go on your way. And that's what you as a security guy in your organization should be doing as well. Don't spend 2 weeks, hit your head on this thing, get those indicators out, move on to the next one. And when you do have your downtime, spend that reanalyzing all the old incidents using new data you have. It's like, hey, for this sample, we didn't know what happened here. It's what we call analysis debt, technical debt. We have sections that we don't know. That's fine. Everyone does. But mark what you don't know. We have network traffic. It looks encrypted. I don't know how it's encrypted. Put that big red letters in your report. We don't know how this is encrypted. And then next time it comes in, everything else stayed the same. You got your report out in an hour. Now you've got, hey, I have an extra 50 minutes. Let me go look at that big red section there. Let's see if I can figure out the encryption this time. If I can't, well, let's put in what I did figure out and reassess. I've got the encryption. I don't see how it's doing this last level of bit shifting. Next time, focus on that. So focus on your knowledge gaps. Get those knocked out every time a new report comes in. And hire a programmer. Damn it. That is the worst thing most people don't do, is they don't hire someone who can actually script or program or do anything worthwhile in their section. You don't need to be a programmer to reversing. It helps, but you don't need it. But you do need someone to write these custom C2 clients for you, to write these configuration dumplers, to write the Python scripts to automatically decrypt all the strings in your malware. You need someone that can do that, even if it's not you. You figure out where the stuff's at, you point someone at it, and say, I want that. That routine right there needs to take this data and do something with it, and let them figure it out. And make those scripts and tools daily, weekly, always, and continually. And when you do this, what you'll get is something like this, where you have an email attack coming in, you see it's for a brand new Reconnaissance, a new industry conference coming up, but it's coming from a Hotmail account you've seen in the last 6 months, multiple times. You see it contains a PDF of the same exploit that you've seen before. Again, these are red flags. Keep flagging on this. You see it drops in a file for Poison Ivy. You've seen that before because you know what to look for it. It creates an ADS in Windows System 32 that just pops out at you. It then beacons out to a brand new domain, which you didn't know of before, but it didn't matter because you ran a volatility plugin to just drop the stuff out of memory to tell you exactly what it was designed to beacon to and what settings it was configured to do once it dropped on your machine. So once you know this data, it feeds onto itself. Once you know it's Poison Ivy, it's like, oh, okay, I then know to run these plugins in this sequence to gather all the data out of it and be done with it. And again, the idea here is to speed up your analysis, focus on the indicators, not your reversing, and move on with your job as quickly as possible. And that's it. Thank you. So, data forensics, baskin, and questions. Yes.
So, your last screen, you talked about email. One thing I could say is go to DMARC initiative, get all of your DMARC stuff in place so that you don't, so that people can't spoof your own mail servers.
Yes.
And you'll also the benefit of enabling DMARC is if you get their forensic analysis and their aggregate analysis, you'll get all the emails that people are spoofing your domain sent to you.
Great reason. I actually didn't know that existed. Great. DMARC.
Yeah.
So you know when people are spoofing.
DMARC. Yeah. It's like it's like an initiative to get everyone to use SPF and DKIM and get them enabled properly, and then aggregate all the results and send it to you in this packaged XML file.
Very cool. Except XML, but other than that.
Yeah, I prefer JSON.
Good. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I was reading that there's malware pieces that look for VMware
Yes.
analysis and then work differently under a VMware infrastructure. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, they do. We have a lot of samples that still don't run to this day. They're looking for the file system with the hard drive name and registry, where they're looking for known strings, and they just don't run. if those values are set. Most common way is if they look at the MAC address in 000C25, I think, which is a known for VMware, they just don't run. So in those cases, we can look for that, detect it, and just actually patch it out of the executable. But this year, in the last, I guess, year and a half, that's just kind of dropped by the wayside. We haven't seen many still do VM detection. Mostly, I don't think they care anymore. They know most of their clients are probably running it on a Citrix server or VM server of some sort, and they just don't care. They're still going to get their data regardless. Or they do some really other maneuvers. So I think they do it, but it's a small percentage of samples that do VM checking.
One other comment. So I noticed all the really great group of tools and stuff. I actually work with you guys in that project. And there's a tool that I noticed that when you were talking about the exploitation and the delivery, and the tools that you mentioned were all, and I agree with you, you don't know who it is that's running those online tools, or it might be a competitor, analysis company. Yes. So you're giving away whatever it is that you're analyzing to those online tools. Have you heard of Thug? It's written by Buffer, Angelo Delario.
No, I haven't. Thug.
Part of the HoneyNet project.
Okay.
It's a low interaction HoneyNet client, all written in Python. It's fairly new, maybe within the past couple of years, but it basically mimics a wide array of browsers, and then it also mimics the Java plugin, PDF, all sorts of exploitable components of the browser, but it's not a browser. It's running it in Linux.
Just pretends to be a browser.
Right, it pretends to be a browser. It uses one of the problems with it is it's a little bit slow because it uses PyV8 to render the JavaScript. But it's a way that you can do everything that you can do with URL query and all those other URL analysis tools that you were talking about, but do it on your own system.
So it's not online based. That's downloadable.
It's on GitHub.
Okay, so that's a Thug.
Thug, but Thug comes up with a lot of if you search for Thug, but look for Buffer and Thug. Buffer's the guy who wrote it.
Okay. Good, thank you. Wasn't aware of that. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys for coming. And I don't think there's any more